My name is Grover, 32 years old, and our family Christmas lunch has always been a minefield of expectations. This year was different, though. As we sat around Grandma Eleanor's antique table, the conversation inevitably turned to my sister Amy's perfect baby shower and her newborn son. Then came the question I had been dreading. Grandma looked directly at me and Rebecca Fork poised midair. "Now when will you two finally start a family?" She had no idea about our 3 years of failed fertility treatments. Before I tell you how I finally stood up to my family after years of judgment, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to deal with insensitive relatives during the holidays. Growing up as the middle child between two overachieving siblings was never easy. My older brother Michael excelled at everything academic, breezing through college and into medical school with seemingly minimal effort. My younger sister Amy was the family darling, beautiful and charming from day one, collecting achievements and admiration wherever she went. And then there was me, Grover Harrison Thompson, perpetually average in my parents' eyes. My father Thomas was a successful attorney who expected his children to follow in his ambitious footsteps. My mother Diane was a former high school valedictorian turned community organizer who couldn't understand why I wasn't driven to be at the top of every class. Family dinners often became impromptu progress reports, where Michael and Amy would share their latest accomplishments while I sank lower in my chair. Grover got a B+ on his math test. My mother would announce with a slight frown while in the same breath, "Michael has been invited to the state science competition again, and Amy won first place in the spelling bee." It wasn't that they didn't love me. They did, but their love always seemed conditional on achievement. The only person who accepted me completely was my grandfather William. Grandpa Will was different from the rest of the family. A carpenter by trade, he valued creativity and authenticity over accolades and appearances. "They're all chasing shadows," he would tell me during our weekend woodworking sessions in his garage. "Find what makes your soul light up, Grover, and the rest will follow." Those Saturdays with Grandpa Will were my sanctuary. While my siblings were off at various competitions or extracurricular activities, I was learning how to build birdhouses, repair furniture, and eventually create beautiful custom pieces. In his workshop, my average grades didn't matter. What mattered was patience, attention to detail, and the satisfaction of creating something with my own hands. When Grandpa Will died during my sophomore year of college, something fundamental broke inside me. He had been fighting lung cancer for months, but kept it from everyone except my grandmother. Typical of him not wanting to burden anyone or draw attention to himself. The funeral was held on a crisp autumn day, and as I watched them lower his casket into the ground, I made a silent promise to live life on my terms, just as he had taught me. Our family holiday traditions always centered around Grandma Eleanor's house, a sprawling colonial in the suburbs where she had lived for over 40 years. Christmas was the biggest event of the year, a mandatory attendance affair where the unspoken family competition reached its peak intensity. The dining room would be transformed with Grandma's best china crystal glasses that had belonged to her mother, and centerpieces that Amy inevitably had helped arrange. The walls were lined with family photos documenting achievements, graduations, awards, ceremonies, weddings. My own contributions to this gallery were noticeably fewer. Amy had always been Grandma Eleanor's favorite, though no one openly acknowledged this fact. My sister knew exactly how to charm our grandmother, bringing her thoughtful gifts, calling her multiple times a week, and generally playing the role of devoted granddaughter to perfection. It wasn't calculated on Amy's part. She genuinely adored Grandma, but the result was that Amy became the golden standard against which the rest of us were measured. I tried finding my own path despite the family pressure. After college, I opened a small custom furniture business, channeling everything Grandpa Will had taught me. It was moderately successful enough to pay the bills and give me satisfaction, but not the kind of career that impressed at family gatherings. "Custom furniture is a lovely hobby, dear," my mother would say, emphasizing the word hobby in a way that dismissed years of hard work. "But have you thought about getting an MBA? There's still time to join a proper company." I met Rebecca during my junior year of college at a campus grief support group. She was there dealing with the recent loss of her mother to breast cancer, while I was still processing Grandpa Will's death. Something clicked between us immediately, a recognition of shared pain but also a similar perspective on life. Rebecca was studying education, determined to become an elementary school teacher despite her father's insistence that she pursue law. We bonded over our experiences with family pressure and our desires to chart our own courses. My dad means well, she told me during one of our early coffee dates. He just can't understand why I'd choose a career that pays so little when I could be earning 6 figures as a lawyer like him. At least your dad thinks you could be a lawyer, I replied with a laugh. Mine has pretty much written me off as the family underachiever. Our relationship blossomed quickly. In Rebecca, I found someone who saw me not as a disappointment or a project to improve, but as a person worthy of love just as I was. We moved in together after graduation and got married 2 years later in a small ceremony that horrified my mother with its simplicity. We both wanted children someday, but we weren't in a rush. We agreed to enjoy our marriage, build our careers, and start a family when we felt ready, not when society or our families expected it. Little did we know how much that decision would come to haunt us. Just wait until you have kids, my mother would say whenever we disagreed about something. Then you'll understand. If only she knew how much those casual comments would someday hurt. After 4 years of marriage, Rebecca and I decided we were ready to start a family. We had settled into our careers. She was teaching 3rd grade at a local elementary school, and my furniture business had developed a loyal customer base. We had bought a small house with a yard perfect for children to play in, and we had even begun setting aside money for future college funds. The night we officially decided to try for a baby remains crystal clear in my memory. We were sitting on our back deck watching fireflies dance across the yard, a bottle of wine between us. "I think I'm ready," Rebecca said, her eyes reflecting the string lights we had hung around the porch. "For another glass," I asked, reaching for the bottle. She laughed, that musical sound that still makes my heart skip a beat. "No, for a baby. I think it's time, don't you?" The surge of excitement I felt was overwhelming. I had always wanted to be a father, to pass down the wisdom and unconditional love that Grandpa Will had given me. We decided to stop using birth control that very night, making love with a new sense of purpose and possibility. Those first months were filled with anticipation and joy. We transformed our spare bedroom into a hypothetical nursery in our minds, discussing color schemes and furniture I would build. Rebecca downloaded period tracking apps and started taking prenatal vitamins. Each month brought the excitement of possibility, the whispered maybe this time, as we waited to see if her period would come. But as months turned into a year with no positive pregnancy test, our excitement began to fade, replaced by a growing concern that something might be wrong. Friends around us were announcing pregnancies with seemingly effortless ease. My sister Amy got married to her college sweetheart James, and they immediately began talking about starting a family. It felt like salt in an increasingly painful wound. "Maybe we should see a doctor," Rebecca suggested one night after another negative test. Her voice was steady, but I could see the worry in her eyes. Our first appointment with a fertility specialist, Dr. Sarah Martinez, was both reassuring and terrifying. She explained the testing process, calmly assuring us that many couples face fertility challenges and go on to have healthy children. "The good news is that you're both still young," she said, reviewing our intake forms. "That gives us many options if we do find an issue." The testing process was exhaustive. Rebecca underwent blood work to check her hormone levels, ultrasounds to examine her ovaries and uterus, and a hysterosalpingogram to ensure her fallopian tubes were open. For me, there were blood tests and the somewhat awkward experience of providing semen samples for analysis. When we returned for our results, Dr. Martinez's expression told me everything before she even spoke. She invited us to sit down in her office, a space designed to be comforting with its soft lighting and absence of the typical clinical feel. "I'm afraid we've identified a significant male factor infertility issue," she said, gently turning her computer screen so we could see the results. "Grover, your sperm count is extremely low, and the motility and morphology are also concerning." The words hit me like a physical blow. In that moment, I felt like a failure at the most basic biological function. All those years of feeling average in my family's eyes suddenly seemed trivial compared to this fundamental inadequacy. Rebecca reached for my hand immediately, her grip tight and reassuring. "What does this mean for our chances of having a baby?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the tears welling in her eyes. Dr. Martinez explained our options. Intrauterine insemination IUI might work despite my low numbers, or we could consider in vitro fertilization, IVF, with intracytoplasmic sperm injection, ICSI, where they would inject a single sperm directly into an egg. The success rates, costs, and emotional tolls of each option were laid out before us like items on a menu we never wanted to read. Throughout it all, Rebecca was my rock. Not once did she make me feel responsible or inadequate, though the diagnosis was clearly linked to my body's failure. That night, as I broke down in our bedroom, she held me close and whispered fiercely, "This changes nothing about who you are to me. We're in this together, and we'll figure it out together." We decided to keep our struggle private from our families. Part of it was the intimate nature of the issue. Explaining my sperm count to my parents and grandmother wasn't exactly dinner conversation. But the larger reason was protection from the inevitable opinions, suggestions, and pressure that would follow such a revelation. We began treatment with IUI, a relatively less invasive and less expensive option. The process involved Rebecca taking medication to stimulate her ovaries, careful monitoring of her cycle, and then the procedure itself, where my specially washed sperm sample would be placed directly into her uterus around the time of ovulation. Each cycle brought a new wave of hope, followed by crushing disappointment. The first negative result was devastating. The second made us more determined. By the third, a grim routine had established itself: injections, monitoring appointments, the procedure, the anxious 2-week wait, and then the tears when Rebecca's period arrived right on schedule. The financial strain was considerable. My health insurance covered some diagnostic testing, but very little of the actual treatment. Rebecca's teacher's insurance was slightly better, but still left us paying thousands out of pocket for each attempt. I took on extra furniture commissions, working late into the night after my regular workday. Rebecca tutored students after school. Our savings, once earmarked for our future child's education, dwindled rapidly. The emotional toll was even greater. Sex, once spontaneous and joyful, became a clinical chore scheduled around ovulation. Then, as the treatments took center stage, it almost disappeared entirely. We were both exhausted, stressed, and increasingly isolated as we withdrew from social situations that might involve pregnancy announcements or children. Our marriage, strong as it was, felt the strain. We had our first serious argument after the fourth failed IUI when I suggested taking a break from treatments. "How can you want to stop?" Rebecca demanded, her voice rising uncharacteristically. "Don't you want this baby?" "Of course I do," I shouted back, frustration and guilt boiling over. "But at what cost? We're bleeding money. You're pumping yourself full of hormones, and for what? Another negative test, another month of disappointment." We stood on opposite sides of our kitchen, the space between us seeming impossibly wide. Then Rebecca's shoulders slumped, and she began to cry, not the controlled tears of previous disappointments, but deep, body-shaking sobs. I crossed the room in 2 strides and wrapped my arms around her. "I'm sorry," I whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry." "No, you're right," she said once the sobs subsided. "We need a break. I don't recognize myself anymore. All I think about, all I dream about, is getting pregnant." That night we made a decision to step back from treatments for a few months. We needed to remember who we were as a couple beyond this struggle, to heal both financially and emotionally before deciding our next steps. Those months were surprisingly healing. We took a weekend trip to a mountain cabin, leaving ovulation kits and prenatal vitamins behind. We reconnected physically, without the pressure of conception hanging over us. We talked about other paths to parenthood, adoption, foster care, or even a child-free life focused on our careers, travel, and each other. For the first time since our diagnosis, I felt a sense of peace. Whatever happened, whatever path we chose, we would face it together. It was during this break that we began to consider opening up to our families about our struggle, though the timing never seemed right. Little did we know that events were about to force our hand in ways we never could have anticipated. My sister Amy had always led a charmed life, at least from the outside looking in. She was the kind of person who seemed to succeed effortlessly at everything she attempted. In high school, she was both valedictorian and prom queen, an unusual combination that spoke to her ability to excel academically while remaining genuinely likable. She attended an Ivy League university on a partial scholarship, graduating with honors before landing a coveted position at a prestigious marketing firm in the city. Her personal life followed the same perfect trajectory. She met James Wilson during her senior year of college when they were paired as lab partners in an elective astronomy course. James came from a similar background: ambitious family, excellent education, and career prospects as a corporate lawyer. They dated for 3 years before getting married, in what my mother repeatedly called the wedding of the year, a lavish affair with 300 guests at the country club where my parents were members. Social media only amplified the appearance of Amy's perfect life. Her Instagram feed was a carefully curated collection of professional achievements, romantic date nights, with James' exotic vacations and their newly purchased colonial house in an exclusive neighborhood. Every photo was flawlessly filtered, every caption cleverly written. It was exhausting to witness, especially during our fertility struggles. "Have you seen Amy's post about her promotion?" my mother would ask during our weekly phone calls. "The firm is sending her to London for a month to establish their international division. Isn't that wonderful?" Or from my father, "James just made junior partner. Youngest in the firm's history, apparently. Your sister certainly knows how to pick them." The family constantly held Amy up as the example of what success should look like. During holiday gatherings, conversations inevitably centered around her latest accomplishments, with pointed questions about when Rebecca and I might finally upgrade from our starter home, or when I might expand my little furniture business into something more substantial. Amy herself wasn't malicious about her success. She was actually one of the few family members who showed genuine interest in my work and Rebecca's teaching career. But she was oblivious to how her charmed life highlighted our struggles, especially once she and James decided to start a family. The announcement came during Easter dinner at my parents' house. We had just finished the main course when Amy clinked her water glass with a spoon, drawing everyone's attention. "James and I have some exciting news," she said, her face glowing with happiness. James stood beside her, his arm wrapped proudly around her waist. "We're expecting baby Wilson will be joining us in November." The dining room erupted in cheers and congratulations. My mother burst into tears, immediately rushing to embrace Amy. My father clapped James on the back with uncharacteristic emotion. Grandma Eleanor declared it the best Easter present she could have imagined. Rebecca's hand found mine under the table, squeezing so hard it hurt. We both plastered on smiles and offered our congratulations when the initial commotion died down. "I'm so happy for you," I told Amy, hugging her carefully, as if she might break, though she was barely showing at 12 weeks. "This is wonderful news," Rebecca added, her teacher's ability to hide her true feelings coming in handy. "You're going to be amazing parents." As soon as we could politely escape, I found myself in my parents' downstairs bathroom, gripping the sink with white knuckles as silent tears streamed down my face. Rebecca slipped in moments later, locking the door behind her. "I know," she whispered, wrapping her arms around me from behind. "I know." We didn't need to say more. The pain of watching someone else achieve so easily what we had been fighting for was beyond words. We composed ourselves, returned to the celebration with renewed fake smiles, and left as soon as we could, without seeming rude. The months that followed were a parade of pregnancy, updates, nursery preparations, and family excitement. Amy's baby shower was an elaborately planned affair that Grandma Eleanor took particular pride in organizing. The invitations were hand-calligraphed, the venue was an upscale garden restaurant, and the gifts were extravagant designer baby clothes, top-of-the-line equipment, and enough toys to fill a small store. Rebecca and I attended, of course. Social obligation demanded it, though it felt like walking willingly into an emotional minefield. Rebecca had helped with some of the preparations, putting her crafting skills to use on decorations and party favors. I contributed a handmade crib, pouring weeks of effort into creating something special for my future niece or nephew, channeling all my complicated emotions into the sanding, carving, and finishing. The shower itself was beautiful but painful. Rebecca and I moved through the crowd of cooing women, and uncomfortable-looking men like ghosts performing the expected social rituals, while feeling completely detached from the joy around us. "You two are next, right?" Amy's mother-in-law asked us during the gift opening. "No pressure, but these cousins should be close in age." "Better get started soon," chimed in one of Amy's friends. "The biological clock waits for no one." "Some people just know they're meant to be parents," added another guest watching Amy unwrap yet another impossibly tiny outfit. Amy has always had that maternal instinct. Each comment was like a paper cut, individually minor, but collectively unbearable. Rebecca excused herself to the restroom 3 times during the event. I lost count of how many times I refilled my glass with the non-alcoholic punch. The weeks leading up to Christmas were filled with even more family excitement, as Amy gave birth to a healthy baby boy they named William Thomas Wilson Will for short, after both our grandfather and Amy's father-in-law. The family group chat exploded with photos, Will sleeping, Will yawning, Will being held by proud grandparents. Each new image was accompanied by multiple exclamation points and heart emojis. My mother called me specifically to ask why I hadn't liked the most recent batch of photos. "Your sister notices these things," she said reproachfully. "Don't you care about your nephew?" Of course I cared. I loved that tiny boy fiercely from the moment I saw his scrunched-up face in the first hospital photo. My complicated feelings weren't about him, they were about the situation, about the injustice of fertility being granted so easily to some and withheld so cruelly from others. But I couldn't explain that without revealing our private struggle, so I simply apologized and went back through the photos, dutifully tapping the heart icon on each one. As Christmas approached, Rebecca and I found our dread growing. This would be Will's first Christmas barely a month after his birth. He would undoubtedly be the center of attention, and the comparison between Amy's new family and our childless state would be impossible to ignore. "We need a plan," Rebecca said one evening in early December, as we decorated our own modest Christmas tree. "I can't handle another event like the baby shower." We sat down that night and created a strategy. We would drive separately to allow for a quick exit if needed. We would prepare standard responses to the inevitable questions about our family plans. We would support each other with secret signals when one of us needed a break. And most importantly, we would present a united front if anyone pushed too hard. "No more smiling and nodding while they make us feel like failures," I said firmly. "We've been through too much for that." Rebecca nodded, her expression more determined than I had seen it in months. "Agreed. It's time to stand our ground." We had no idea just how literally we would be putting that plan into action. I woke up on Christmas morning with a knot of anxiety already forming in my stomach. Rebecca was still asleep beside me, her face peaceful in a way it rarely was these days. I slipped out of bed, quietly padded to the kitchen, and started the coffee maker, watching the early morning light cast long shadows across our backyard. 3 years of trying to have a baby. 3 years of doctors' treatments, tears, and disappointment. And now we were about to face a family gathering centered around a newborn, with all the attendant comments and questions that would inevitably come our way. By the time Rebecca joined me in the kitchen, I had already rehearsed a dozen potential conversations in my head, none of them ending well. "You're spiraling," she said, knowingly, accepting the mug of coffee I handed her. She was wearing the Christmas sweater my parents had given her last year, a gesture of solidarity and family unity that made my heart ache. "Just preparing for battle," I replied, attempting humor but falling short. Rebecca set down her coffee and took both my hands in hers. "Listen to me, Grover. We've faced worse than a family Christmas. We've held each other through failed treatments, through negative tests, through the days when it felt like we couldn't breathe from the pain of it all. We can handle a few hours of insensitive comments." Her strength centered me, as it always did. "You're right, and we have our exit strategy, if things get too intense." "Exactly." Plus, she added with a small smile, "I may have slipped a flask of bourbon into my purse for emergencies." That made me laugh genuinely. "Have I told you lately that you're the best decision I ever made?" "Not since yesterday," she teased, rising on tiptoes to kiss me. "Now let's get dressed and face the music." We arrived at Grandma Eleanor's house at exactly noon, the agreed-upon time for Christmas lunch. The driveway was already full of cars. My parents' luxury SUV, Amy and James's European sedan, Uncle Frank's pickup truck, and several others belonging to extended family members who made the annual pilgrimage. Grandma's house looked like something from a holiday catalog. White lights outlined the roof and windows, a massive wreath hung on the front door, and through the windows we could see the glow of the 12-foot Christmas tree in the living room. Under different circumstances, it would have been heartwarming. Ready, Rebecca asked, squeezing my hand. As I'll ever be, I replied, reaching for the bags of presents in the back seat. We were greeted at the door by my father, already wearing the slightly glazed expression that came from his traditional Christmas morning bourbon. "There you are," he boomed, pulling me into an awkward one-armed hug. "Merry Christmas. Everyone's in the living room. Wait until you see little Will. He's wearing the Santa outfit your mother bought him. Spitting image of your grandfather, I swear." The house was warm and filled with the familiar sense of Grandma Eleanor's cooking roast turkey cinnamon pine from the fresh tree. Family members were scattered throughout the living room and adjoining dining room, conversations overlapping in a familiar holiday cacophony. My mother spotted us and hurried over, perfume wafting around her, as she embraced first Rebecca, then me. "Merry Christmas, dears. Don't you both look nice? Rebecca, that sweater is perfect on you. I knew it would be. Come in, come in. Amy's just feeding Will, but she'll be down in a minute." We made our way through the room, exchanging greetings and holiday wishes with various relatives. Cousin Sarah, heavily pregnant with her third child, immediately launched into a detailed account of her latest ultrasound. "The technician says he's already 7 pounds. Can you believe it? I'm absolutely enormous. You two are so smart to wait on having kids. Pregnancy is just brutal on your body." I felt Rebecca tense beside me, but she maintained her polite smile. "Everyone's journey is different," she said diplomatically. We had just escaped Sarah's pregnancy monologue when Uncle Frank cornered me near the drinks table, scotch already in hand, despite the early hour. "So, nephew," he said, clapping me on the shoulder hard enough to slosh my newly poured wine, "when are you going to follow your sister's example and give Eleanor another great-grandchild? Or are you shooting blanks?" He laughed uproariously at his own joke, oblivious to the way I froze beside him. Frank, my Aunt Margaret, appeared beside him, looking mortified. "That's inappropriate." "Just guy talk, Maggie," he protested, but allowed himself to be led away, winking at me over his shoulder. I stood there, wineglass clutched too tightly in my hand, when I heard Rebecca's voice from across the room. "I'm going to help in the kitchen for a bit." Our eyes met, and I nodded slightly, understanding her need for a momentary escape. I was just considering following her when Amy appeared at the top of the stairs, cradling a small bundle wrapped in a soft blue blanket. The room immediately quieted all attention, turning to the new mother and child. "Sorry we're late coming down," Amy said, carefully descending the stairs. "Someone needed a change and a feeding before his big Christmas debut." My parents rushed to the bottom of the stairs, eager for their turn to hold their grandson. I hung back, unsure how to navigate this moment that was both beautiful and painful. James appeared behind his wife, his hand protective, at the small of her back. He looked tired but happy, the way new parents do, slightly shell-shocked, but radiating pride. When the initial commotion died down, Amy spotted me and made her way over, still holding Will. "Do you want to hold your nephew?" she asked, her face softer than I'd seen it in years. I nodded, suddenly emotional. She carefully transferred the tiny boy into my arms, adjusting my hold until she was satisfied. Looking down at Will's sleeping face, I felt a complicated rush of love, grief, and longing. He did look remarkably like our grandfather, with the same slightly upturned nose and pointed chin. I touched his cheek gently with one finger, marveling at the softness of his skin. "He's perfect, Amy," I said softly. "Absolutely perfect." She beamed at me, exhaustion and happiness written across her face in equal measure. "Thanks for the crib, by the way. It's the most beautiful thing in the nursery. Everyone who visits comments on it." For a brief moment it was just the three of us, me, my sister, and her son, connected by family bonds that transcended my complicated feelings about the situation. Then my mother appeared with her camera, insisting on capturing the moment, and the spell was broken. Rebecca returned from the kitchen, her composure restored. She crossed to join us, cooing appropriately over Will and engaging Amy in conversation about newborn sleep patterns, her teacher's knowledge of child development coming in handy. Time to set the table. Grandma Eleanor announced from the dining room doorway, "Dinner in 20 minutes." Rebecca and I volunteered to help, grateful for the task to occupy our hands and minds. We followed Grandma into the dining room where her best china and crystal were already laid out on the table waiting to be arranged. "Rebecca, dear, you know where the napkins go," Grandma said, handing her a stack of pressed linen napkins. "Grover, you're on silverware duty." As we worked, Grandma moved around the table making small adjustments, her perfectionism showing in every straightened fork and precisely centered plate. At 82, she was still remarkably spry, though she occasionally winced from the arthritis in her hands. "Amy and James seem to be adjusting well to parenthood," she commented, as she folded a napkin into an elaborate shape. "They do," Rebecca agreed. "Will is a very calm baby from what I can see." "Nothing better than a new baby at Christmas," Grandma continued, a hint of wistfulness in her voice. "Reminds us all of new beginnings, new life." She paused, looking pointedly at Rebecca and me. "I do hope I live long enough to see more great-grandchildren. At my age, one can't take time for granted." The statement hung in the air, its implied question unmistakable. I concentrated on arranging the silverware, pretending I hadn't understood the hint. "The turkey smells amazing, Grandma," I said, deliberately changing the subject. "Did you do anything different this year?" She allowed the diversion, launching into an explanation of her brining technique, but the moment had set the tone for what was to come. As the family began to gather around the table, I caught Rebecca's eye across the room and saw my own apprehension reflected there. We were in for a long meal. The family settled around Grandma Eleanor's extended dining table, a seating arrangement that had remained largely unchanged for years. Grandma at the head. My parents to her right, Amy and James with baby Will and a portable bassinet beside them, Uncle Frank and Aunt Margaret, cousin Sarah, and her husband Todd, and a few other relatives arranged according to some familial hierarchy that no one questioned. Rebecca and I took our usual spots near the far end, somewhat removed from the central action. In past years, this distance had bothered me, a physical manifestation of our peripheral status in the family dynamic. Today, I was grateful for the slight buffer it provided. Dad said grace, a tradition he had inherited from Grandpa Will years ago. His prayer was longer than usual, with special mentions of the blessing of new life in our family and the joy of watching the next generation begin. I kept my eyes closed even after he finished, taking an extra moment to compose myself before facing the meal ahead. The first half hour progressed relatively smoothly. Food was passed, compliments to the cook were offered, and conversation flowed in predictable channels: updates on jobs, homes, local gossip, and politically neutral current events. Will slept peacefully in his bassinet, waking only once for a quick check from Amy. "He's such a good baby," my mother gushed. "Barely makes a peep." "Not like you, Grover, you screamed for the first 3 months straight. We thought we'd never sleep again." "Must be taking after his mother," Uncle Frank added. "Amy was always the easy one." I smiled tightly and focused on my plate. As the main course was winding down, the conversation inevitably turned more directly to baby Will and Amy's experience of new motherhood. "How are you finding it?" Aunt Margaret asked Amy. "Being a mother?" Amy's face softened. "It's overwhelming sometimes, but in the best way. I've never been so tired or so happy. It's like my heart is walking around outside my body now." Murmurs of agreement came from the parents around the table. Rebecca's hand found my knee under the tablecloth, squeezing gently. "And the delivery went well?" cousin Sarah asked, one hand resting on her pregnant belly. "No complications?" "Textbook perfect," James answered proudly. "Amy was amazing. 8 hours from start to finish, and only 20 minutes of pushing. The nurses said they'd never seen a first-time mom handle it so well," Amy added with a hint of justified pride. Grandma Eleanor beamed at her youngest grandchild. "That baby shower we threw was just the beginning. Wait until you see what I have planned for his christening this spring." "The shower was beautiful," Grandma Amy agreed. "Everything was perfect." It was Grandma nodded satisfaction, evident in her expression. Then she turned her gaze directly to Rebecca and me, her eyes suddenly piercing. "Your sister's baby shower was just perfect. Now, when will you two finally start a family? You're not getting any younger, you know." The table fell silent. Even the clinking of silverware against china ceased, as everyone seemed to collectively hold their breath. I felt Rebecca go completely still beside me. Time seemed to slow down as I sat there, fork suspended above my plate, the weight of everyone's attention pressing down on me. 3 years of pain, disappointment, and forced smiles crystallized in that moment into something hard and immovable within me. I carefully set down my fork, took a sip of water, and looked directly at my grandmother. "Actually, Grandma, we did start a family. We just didn't invite anyone who treats us like failures to be part of the journey." The fork in Grandma Eleanor's hand trembled visibly, then clattered against her plate. Her mouth opened and closed once, twice, no sound emerging. Around the table, expressions ranged from shocked to confused to uncomfortable. Amy was the first to attempt damage control. "I'm sure Grandma didn't mean anything by it, Grover. It's just conversation." "No, I don't think it is just conversation when it happens at every single family gathering," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "It's not just conversation when it ignores the reality that not everyone's path to parenthood is simple or guaranteed." My father cleared his throat awkwardly. "Son, this isn't really appropriate dinner table discussion. Neither is my reproductive status, Dad, but that doesn't seem to stop anyone from bringing it up." My mother's eyes had filled with tears, whether from embarrassment or concern I couldn't tell. "Grover, please, it's Christmas." I felt Rebecca's hand on mine, not restraining but supporting. When I glanced at her, she gave me a slight nod of encouragement. "Yes, it's Christmas," I agreed. "A time when families should support each other, not judge or pressure each other. A time when we should be able to be honest about our struggles instead of pretending everything is perfect." The silence that followed was deafening. Will chose that moment to make a small mewling sound in his bassinet, the noise somehow emphasizing the tension rather than breaking it. I had imagined this confrontation many times, usually with shouting and dramatic exits. The reality was quieter, but no less intense. A family frozen in the middle of Christmas dinner, forced to acknowledge the elephant in the room that had been ignored for too long. Grandma Eleanor was the first to break the uncomfortable silence, her voice wavering slightly but still carrying that authoritative tone she had perfected over 8 decades. "I don't understand why you're being so sensitive, Grover. I only asked what every grandmother has the right to ask. There's no need to make a scene." Several relatives nodded in agreement, clearly relieved that someone had spoken. Uncle Frank muttered something about younger generations and too easily offended. I felt a flash of doubt. Maybe I had overreacted, maybe I should apologize and let the moment pass. Then I felt Rebecca's steady presence beside me, and remembered all we had endured in private, while maintaining a cheerful facade for the family's benefit. "It's not about being sensitive, Grandma," I said, keeping my voice even. "It's about acknowledging that your question carries assumptions and judgments that can be hurtful." "Hurtful?" she repeated, genuine confusion in her expression. "How is asking about great-grandchildren hurtful?" I took a deep breath, looked at Rebecca, who nodded almost imperceptibly, and made a decision. Because Rebecca and I have been trying to have a baby for 3 years. We've been through multiple failed fertility treatments. We've spent thousands of dollars and endured more disappointment than you can imagine. So when you ask when we're finally going to start a family, as if we've been selfishly putting it off, it's not just insensitive, it's painful." The words hung in the air, raw and honest in a way I had never been with my family. Amy's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in shock. My mother made a small, distressed sound. 3 years, my father repeated, his usual confidence absent. "You never said anything." "Because it's private." Rebecca spoke up for the first time, her teacher's voice calm but firm. "Because fertility struggles are intensely personal, and we didn't want to field advice or pity or uncomfortable questions. We wanted to handle it in our own way, on our own terms." "But we're family," my mother protested weakly. "We could have supported you." I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped me. "Could you have, Mom, without suggestions about relaxing more, or trying this supplement or that position, without comparing us to Amy and her perfect pregnancy, without making us feel even more like failures?" Mom flinched as if I'd struck her. "I would never want you to feel like a failure." "But I have. I admitted the fight suddenly draining out of me. Every negative test, every failed treatment, every casual comment about when we'll have kids, they all reinforced the feeling that my body is failing at something that should be natural and easy. The vulnerability in my voice seemed to shift something in the room. The defensive postures around the table softened slightly. James, who had been quiet until now, spoke up unexpectedly. "It took us 8 months to conceive Will," he said, glancing at Amy, who nodded for him to continue. "It's not the same as what you're going through, not even close, but those 8 months were harder than we've let on. Each month became more stressful than the last." Amy reached for his hand. "We didn't tell anyone either. It felt like admitting weakness somehow, like we weren't doing something right." This revelation from my seemingly perfect sister stunned me into momentary silence. I had assumed her path to motherhood had been as effortless as everything else in her life appeared to be. "I had no idea," I finally said. "How could you?" Amy replied with a sad smile. "We all present the version of our lives we want others to see. I'm sorry if that made your struggle harder." Uncle Frank, looking uncomfortable with the emotional turn of conversation, attempted to lighten the mood. "Well, this got heavy fast. Maybe we should." "No," Aunt Margaret interrupted him firmly. "This is important, Frank." She turned to Rebecca and me. "I had 3 miscarriages before Sarah was born. Back then, no one talked about these things. You suffered alone and in silence, because fertility problems weren't considered appropriate conversation. I think it's brave of you both to speak up." One by one, family members began sharing stories I had never heard. Before my cousin Todd's wife's struggle with endometriosis, a great-aunt, who had never been able to conceive the fertility drugs my mother had taken before, having Michael. It was as if a dam had broken, releasing decades of unspoken family history. Through it all, Grandma Eleanor remained quiet, her expression unreadable. When there was finally a lull in the conversation, all eyes turned to her, awaiting her response to this unprecedented openness. She looked suddenly older, the matriarchal authority temporarily set aside. Her hands, spotted with age and slightly twisted from arthritis, fidgeted with her napkin. "I lost 3 babies between your father and your Aunt Patricia," she said quietly to my dad. "One at 4 months, twins at 5 months. Your grandfather and I never told you, because that's not what people did in those days. You suffered, you prayed, and you carried on." She looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "I don't agree with discussing private matters so openly. In my day, we kept these things within the marriage, but I never meant to cause you pain, Grover. Not you or Rebecca." It wasn't exactly an apology, but coming from Grandma Eleanor, it was significant. I nodded in acknowledgement, not trusting myself to speak just yet. "The world has changed," she continued, smoothing her napkin with deliberate care. "Perhaps for the better in some ways. No one should feel alone in their suffering." My mother, who had been unusually quiet, finally found her voice. "I wish you had told us," she said, her eyes still damp. "All those times I asked about grandchildren, made comments about your careers or your house. I never imagined you were going through this." "We didn't know how to tell you," Rebecca replied gently. "And honestly, we weren't sure you would understand." Mom looked stricken. "Have I been that terrible a mother?" "No," I hastened to assure her. "But you've always had very clear expectations about what success should look like. Career, marriage, children, all following a particular timeline. We didn't want our struggle to become another way we weren't meeting those expectations." Dad, who had been processing everything silently, finally spoke. "I'm sorry we made you feel that way, son. Your mother and I, we only want you to be happy. We haven't always been good at showing that, I know." The conversation continued, occasionally veering into uncomfortable territory, but always returning to a place of greater understanding than before. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly seen by my family, not as the underachieving middle child, but as a person with real struggles and real strength. As we talked, I noticed Amy quietly nursing Will in the corner, watching the family dynamics shift with a thoughtful expression. When our eyes met, she gave me a small smile of solidarity that meant more than any words could have. The Christmas dinner that had begun with such tension gradually transformed into something else entirely, a genuine family gathering where pretenses had been set aside, however temporarily, in favor of honesty and connection. The remainder of Christmas Day unfolded in a way I never could have predicted. After the heavy conversations at the dining table, there was an almost palpable shift in the family atmosphere. As we moved to the living room for dessert and coffee, the usual performative holiday cheer was replaced by something more authentic. For the first time in years, I found myself having genuine conversations with relatives rather than exchanging polite small talk. Uncle Frank, awkward but sincere, pulled me aside near the Christmas tree. "Listen about that blank's comment earlier. That was out of line. I didn't know what you folks were going through." "You couldn't have known," I replied, surprised by his apology. "Still not an excuse for being a jackass," he said gruffly. "My old man used to say crap like that to me before we found out I had a low count too. Had to use some special doctor help to get Sarah's brother here." This revelation from my traditionally masculine uncle, who built custom motorcycles and went hunting every fall, stunned me into momentary silence. "I had no idea, Uncle Frank." He shrugged, clearly uncomfortable with the vulnerability. "Nobody did except Margaret. Different generation, you know. But maybe that's not always for the best." He clapped me on the shoulder. "You're handling it better than I did. Gives a man perspective, this kind of struggle." Across the room, I could see Rebecca deep in conversation with my mother and Aunt Margaret. Mom was listening intently, occasionally dabbing at her eyes, while Aunt Margaret nodded in understanding. Rebecca caught my eye and gave me a small smile that conveyed both exhaustion and relief. Even the gift exchange, usually a somewhat stressful affair dominated by comparisons and expectations, felt different. The presents seemed less important than the connections being formed or repaired around them. When Amy handed us a small, carefully wrapped package, her expression was hesitant. "It's not much," she said as Rebecca unwrapped a beautiful silver frame containing a photo of Will. "But I thought you might like to have this for your home. He's your nephew after all, and I want him to know his uncle and aunt." The thoughtfulness of the gift brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you, Amy. That means a lot." And she added, lowering her voice slightly, "If you ever want to talk about any of it, the treatments, the disappointments, whatever, I'm here. Different circumstances, I know, but still." "I might take you up on that," I replied, surprised to find I actually meant it. As the evening wound down, Grandma Eleanor approached us as we were preparing to leave. She moved slowly, her arthritic hip giving her more trouble than usual after the long day. "Grover," she said, her voice carrying that familiar, authoritative tone, though her eyes were softer than before. "I expect you and Rebecca for dinner next week. Just the four of us. We have more to discuss, I think." It wasn't a request, but neither was it the command it might have seemed in the past. "We'd like that, Grandma," I replied, and was surprised to realize that was true too. The weeks following Christmas brought changes I never could have anticipated. My mother, always one to tackle problems head-on, once she acknowledged them, threw herself into research about infertility. She called me 3 days after Christmas, her voice tentative in a way I'd rarely heard. "I found some support groups in the area," she said without preamble, "for couples going through fertility issues. I thought you and Rebecca might want to know about them. Or not. It's completely up to you, of course." The fact that she wasn't pushing, wasn't assuming she knew best, was perhaps the clearest sign of how our relationship was evolving. "Thanks, Mom. We'll look into them." "And I've been reading about the emotional aspects of infertility," she continued. "I had no idea how isolating it can be. I just want you to know that, well, that I'm trying to understand better." My sister Amy, who had always been the family achiever, revealed a more vulnerable side in our conversations after Christmas. During a coffee meetup in January with baby Will sleeping in his carrier, she confessed how terrified she had been during her pregnancy. "Everyone expected me to be perfect at this too," she said, stirring her latte absently. "Perfect pregnancy, perfect birth, perfect baby. The pressure was incredible. When we had trouble conceiving, I couldn't tell anyone because I was supposed to be good at everything, you know." "I know exactly what that's like," I replied, the shared understanding, creating a bridge between us that had been missing for years. "James and I are thinking about trying for a second eventually," she admitted. "But honestly, I'm scared. The postpartum period has been harder than I let on. I feel like I'm failing half the time." "You're not," I assured her. "From what I can see, you're a wonderful mother. But you don't have to be perfect, Amy. None of us can be." She looked at me with something like wonder. "When did you get so wise, little brother?" "Somewhere between the third and fourth failed IUI, I replied with a wry smile. Suffering has its educational benefits. Perhaps the most surprising development came from Grandma Eleanor. The dinner she had invited us to turned out to be a turning point in our relationship. In her formal dining room over a meal she had prepared, despite her arthritis, she handed us an envelope. "This isn't an apology," she stated firmly as we opened it to find a check with a substantial sum. "I don't believe in dwelling on what's been said and done, but it is an investment in my future great-grandchildren, however they come to join this family." Rebecca and I were speechless, looking from the check to my grandmother's determined face. "Your grandfather and I had to use what they called medical assistance to conceive your father," she continued, matter-of-factly. "It wasn't discussed back then, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. If this can help with more treatments or adoption or whatever path you choose, then that's what it's for." "Grandma, we can't accept this," I started, but she waved away my protest. "You can, and you will. Family supports family, Grover. I may be old-fashioned in how I express it, but never doubt that I want you and Rebecca to have the family you desire." The handwritten letter she sent a week later was even more precious than the financial gift. In her elegant, slightly shaky script, she apologized for the pain her comments had caused over the years and expressed her admiration for how we had handled our struggle with dignity. Coming from Grandma Eleanor, who prided herself on never admitting fault, it was nothing short of extraordinary. As winter turned to spring, Rebecca and I found ourselves approaching our fertility journey with renewed perspective. We joined a support group for couples facing infertility, finding comfort in shared experiences and practical advice. We began researching adoption more seriously, attending information sessions and speaking with families who had taken that path. Most importantly, we stopped hiding our struggle. Not every conversation was comfortable. Some friends still made thoughtless comments. Some family members still didn't quite get it. But the freedom of honesty outweighed the occasional awkwardness. When Christmas came around again the following year, we returned to Grandma Eleanor's house with lighter hearts. So much had changed in 12 months. We had begun the adoption process working with an agency that specialized in open adoptions. The journey was proving to be its own emotional roller coaster, but we faced it together and with the support of our family. Well, now a toddling 1-year-old stole the show with his first steps occurring right in the middle of Christmas dinner. As everyone cheered and Amy and James beamed with pride, I felt genuine joy without the undercurrent of envy that would have colored the moment a year earlier. When the conversation turned to our adoption journey, Grandma Eleanor asked thoughtful questions about the process and the timeline. "This great-grandchild will be just as much a part of this family as any other," she declared with her typical authority. But now her words brought comfort rather than pain. My mother, who had thrown herself into learning about adoption with the same enthusiasm she brought to all her projects, had already started collecting children's books, reflecting diverse family formations. "For when you're matched with your child," she explained, "every child should see their story reflected in the books they read." As we gathered for the family photo in front of the Christmas tree, I reflected on how speaking our truth had freed not just Rebecca and me, but in some ways the entire family. The perfect facade had cracked, revealing the messy, complicated, loving humans behind it. "Next Christmas might look very different," Rebecca whispered to me as we posed for the photo. We had recently been profiled by a birth mother who was considering us as adoptive parents for her baby due in spring. "Different but wonderful," I replied, squeezing her hand. The journey to building our family wasn't following the path we had originally imagined, but it was our path, and we were no longer walking it alone. Have you ever had to stand up to family members about personal boundaries like Grover did? What was the hardest part about having that conversation? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more authentic family stories. Remember that sometimes the most healing thing we can do is speak our truth, especially when it's difficult. Thank you for listening, and may your own family journeys be filled with understanding and growth.